As the latest Ravnica sets and War of the Spark rotate out of Standard, there can be true closure on one of Magic's biggest and at times most controversial story arcs. But it's also a chance for us to leave one of the game's most popular planes, even if it's to cleanse the palate in preparation for our next visit. So what will the multiverse's largest city look like by then, and what story threads are we keen to see picked up in the future? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour, design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we are going to be talking today about Ravnica. Ravnica is one of Magic's most popular planes. It's been done to death by Lore and Vorthos sort of geared articles, websites, podcasts, whatever have you. But something that you pointed out to me today, Nathan, or not today, the other day, for the recording today, is that Ravnica is going to be rotating out of Standard, or rather Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Allegiance, and War of the Spark are going to be rotating out of Standard, which usually wouldn't fuss me whatsoever, because I don't play Standard. I don't think you really play Standard. In fact, a lot of Vorthos don't play Standard. But the only way that we can ever return to a plane or get closure on a story arc is when these cards are actually finally not played with anymore, because then their kind of visual aesthetic goes out of the zeitgeist. They're kind of the names, the characters, all these kinds of things then become sort of past tense, whereas whenever they're being played in Standard, they're still currently like the current meta. I mean, I think that's kind of right in saying that, right?
Yeah, well, in the same way that like block decks, if you're building a deck specifically out of cards from a set, it will feel more like they're tied together to the theme of the set as it's released. Standard will have a little bit more diversity because you'll be working with sets either side of it. But you'll still have a common aesthetic, something that keeps all of these cards, all these characters in people's hands. If you don't pay attention to the story online, you still might get attachment to Fairy or to Jace or whatever if you have him in your hand for like 6 months and you keep casting him and he keeps winning you games. In the same way, obviously, there is some ire towards certain characters and certain cards that consistently seem to do horrible things to players. Like Oko, for example, I don't think there's much love lost over him because not only was he a douche in the story, but he was a douche on the table. So there is like obviously a direct correlation to the fact that these are characters and storylines that are active in people's mindsets. And as you say, once those rotate out, for the most part, they don't have any residual like fallout. Like most of the time, we're already in 3 more sets anyway. Considering like whilst War of the Spark is now rotating out, we've already been to Eldraine, we've already been to Theros, we're now on Ikoria. It's almost been too long already to keep it in mind. So it is a kind of a little bit of a sunset show. I mean, I don't think it's any. I don't think I'm remiss to say that Ravnica is one of like the tried and tested favourite planes of the player base, and it is definitely for the two of us. And we never really got our chance to get into the nitty gritties of it because we started doing this a little bit after its release. But looking at it, going like leaving our shores as it departs into the endless seas. It's nice to have a little look see and see what it did well, and some of the big things that it's some of the things that you might have seen for the last time with Ravnica, because as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago with Orthos Mike, it did culminate a lot of storylines. It did put a bookend to a lot of them, and did kind of feel very final. And since then, we haven't really felt like there's this big build up, a big build and release with sets, because we don't have it in three set blocks. We only have single sets to do a storyline in. So it is worth noting and having a little look at, and also pulling at the threads of all the things it did leave behind, because there is still a lot of little juicy things that we can look at as to potential future sets, and we can speculate a little bit, and not only just to where we're going to go away from Ravnica, also what we might see when we go back.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of annoying to look back at Ravnica and War of the Spark as a storyline set, because there was so much wrong that's been well documented. We've done a whole episodes on why the Ravnica stories were kind of botched in certain ways, but there are lots of golden nuggets hidden there too. There's still a lot to kind of wrap up. Unfortunately, all the really good stuff that they could have maybe done another set on in maybe 2 or 3 years' time were wrapped up fairly unsatisfactorily in War of the Spark Forsaken. So a lot of the story threads which, when War of the Spark finished and you kind of went, okay, well that was a bin fire of a book, but hey ho, we've got some story threads to keep going with. They then did another bin fire for some inexplicable reason that tied up all those loose ends, but in a really shitty way. We're not going to be talking about the quality of Greg Wiseman's books, because we've done that and it's too depressing. So instead, we're just going to be talking about, yeah, as you say, where Ravnica is now and where would it go in the future. Like, what if we went to like a return to Ravnica in 2 years' time? What would actually be going on? So yeah, I'll hand over to you. You've drawn up a little
You
outline
so
for this
thinly
episode.
veiled your emotions there. It was beautiful.
Ugh,
I
well, yeah.
mean, yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about initially is the fact that there are certain things that this block could do, being our last block that we've had for a while. And one of them is this idea of, and one of the things I think is going to be quite remiss is the fact that we had like a seasonal change across the art styles happen between Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance. It seemed like there was this world that was growing and expanding. We in some ways saw Ravnica almost like the first time in this natural environment, this way that it seems like it's a living, breathing plane, instead of just being a documentation of these 10 different guilds going at each other. In this in the same way, I as much as it was great to see Ravnica in this last 8 days, this was potentially the last time we were going to see it at all, because we didn't know what was going to happen at the end of the block, and obviously we know it's still alive and it's still well and everything, but this might have also, in the time and in the frame, for most people, felt like the last time we might have seen all the guilds doing guildy things before everything falls into actual dissension, unlike the previous one that didn't hold. Saying that, I think that when we come back, when we do come back, I think it will be coming back to a much more traditional Ravnica feeling. And the reason I say this, I feel like even with the story, because I kind of forgot about Forsaken, and I had to kind of reread the entire book this morning, which I wouldn't recommend doing. By the way, doing it in 4 hours, like trying to chop through quickly, it makes the already disjointedness feel more disjointed. But it did feel like at the end, where it's kind of it ends on this kind of like subterfuge, like Lazav's kind of got all these things and all the pies again. It almost feels like we've come all the way back full circle to when Dimir was having all its machinations and behind the scenes. So I actually kind of like the fact that if you think about the story as a whole, it did kind of do a full circle thing, where it did manage to take all of the weird muddiness of Ravnica and bring it back down to almost like its basic roots, if there are that many roots that you can tie together. But
Sure.
yeah, I think also the other big thing as well with the set was it was the first set that had a Guildmasters book, like a D&D supplement released for it, which massively expanded the story and the depth of story that you could go into, the little nuance, the things we were talking about last week about, like things like coffee, like all the notes that make this world feel real. And the fact that they did this, and then they didn't do it with they did it with Theros, and they did it with I imagine what they're going to do is I imagine they're going to do it with Zendikar. They didn't do it with Eldraine, and the reason I think that is because it wasn't a return block. Like they don't have enough of a world to expand on yet. With Theros, we had to. You've got a whole block and then an extra set. With Zendikar, I reckon they'll do one as well, because we've already been there a couple of times and it has some history behind it. So the fact that we had such an expansive storyline, I think, means that we'll probably come back to something hopefully a bit smaller. And I don't think it was against them to kind of have to tie off all of these little things, because it did just leave too much kind of going on. I mean, I know you say that there's a few things that did get tied off too quickly, but again, rereading Forsaken, enough of them do have just about open threads enough that you can kind of get away with it. Because it did take me like having to look through to kind of see how all of the different guilds are now that are left off, and I don't think we've been left very differently as to how we were right at the beginning. Like Borborygmus is still in charge, Rakdos is still in charge, Aurelia's still in charge. Like there's not actually that much difference beyond a couple of spirits dying along the way. So I mean, I don't know how you feel about where we ended with all the guilds at the end of it, but as a structure of a plane, obviously the magics of the plane only work with all the guilds being interwoven and working in balance, which is why Niv Mizzet had to be reborn as the personification of the guild pact. I mean, I think it's kind of good, because it does, as you say, kind of we kind of had to like almost varnish it and go, right, cool, that's it, that's Ravnica done. If we go back, we can go back and do something new again, but it's back to being kind of a normal, duplicitous, rivalry kind of Ravnica. I liked how it finished. I liked how it ended, if I'm being honest.
Cool. I completely disagree.
Good. Right, go on. Tell me why.
I don't think it's at all the same as how it was left off. I think it was the same in terms of that there's the power structure with the guilds, and now there's a guild pack that's actually invested in Ravnica in the form of Niv Mizzet. Sure, in that way it's the same, but I think the power structures of the ruling guilds is completely different. To me, it always seemed, and this was from Return to Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance, Guilds Ravnica. I wasn't playing during the time of Dissension, but I know even back then Ravnica looked a little bit different. Everything was still a bit more balanced. But for me, the ruling guilds of Ravnica, and I mean the ruling guilds, were always the Orzhov, the Izzet, the Boros, and the Azorius. They were always the ones, to me, that seemed to hold the most sway and the most power, whether it was through religion or authoritarianism or technology or whatever have you. And that the other guilds were always the ones that were kind of left in the dust or being a bit more separatist. So, like the Gruul clans and the Dimir and the Golgari
Golgari, yeah.
were always second-class citizens. And then you had people like the Simic, for example, who were separatists. They didn't really want to know about the rest of Ravnica. They would maybe do a little bit of like experimentation here and there, maybe a little bit of medicine, but for the most part, they were just wanting to do their own experiments in their zygotes. I think is that what they called them?
Yeah, zygotes. Good.
Yeah, zygotes. Selesnya as well were fairly separatist. The Rakdos were second-class citizens as well. So I think those four clans, Orzhov, Izzet, Boros, and Azorius, going in to Guilds of Ravnica are the ones that kind of hold all the cards. But since War of the Spark, where we find out that the Azorius, the Izzet, and the Orzhov were amongst the guilds that had Bolas pawns in them, or had completely changed their power structure, or maybe had been undermined for whatever reason. I think it's all flipped on its head. So if you look at, say, for example, I'm going to use the Azorius as an example. The Azorius were the police and the lawmakers of Ravnica, essentially. And even their own guild, in the form of Lavinia, didn't like the way that Dovin Barn treated the guild. Because A, he wasn't a Ravnican, so he wasn't invested in the people.
Too many fingers.
Yeah, and he was way too much, or like he was too authoritarian even for like most of the Azorius. And since War of the Spark, the Orzhov don't have the Obsidat anymore. The Izzet, whilst Raoul Zarek is still technically the leader, is now in complete disarray with people challenging his rule, and Niv Mizzet is now not directly affiliated with the Izzet because he is now the Living Guild Pact, although that could be a storyline where we can see a Guild Pact which has maybe a conflict of interests. You have the Boros, which, alright, didn't necessarily fall from grace because they were on the side of the Ravnicans rather than Bolas, but we see Feather coming back, and Feather is a more sympathetic figure than Aurelia. And we could see a power struggle there moving into a new set. And then the Azorius has Lavinia, which, although she's very much an Azorius law mage, she's not like a soft touch. She's definitely not the sort of authoritarian that Dovin Barn was. And then if you look at the other guilds, by and large, I mean, look at the Gruul. The Gruul's religion surrounding Ilarg the Raiseboar was proven to be right. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about whether the Gruul clans were going to rise again. Their literal pig god came back and fucked shit up.
And it was a 16-year-old punk that made it happen.
Yeah, look, and their only downside coming out of War of the Spark is the fact that people looked at Domri Raid and went, "Oh, he was actually a little fucking idiot who kind of went under the guy like the reigns of Bolas," and that's the only real sort of downside. Borborygmos is now back in charge of mainly of the Gruul clans, and then if you look at the Dimir, as you said, Lazav is now fucking everywhere. He
is everybody.
He's everywhere. So there are going to obviously, I mean, we should have said this at the top of the show. There are spoilers for all the War of the Spark stuff. This is a reflection.
God, this is a sunset show.
I know, we're terrible. We're terrible at it. But so if you look at Lazav, like, I'm going to miss stuff because he is literally in so many things. He is partnered up with Taser. So Tomic is now the leader of the Orzhov, but Taser is in the background pulling the strings with the help of Lazav. But Lazav has already said he's looking to control Taser.
And technically they're also deferring to those three other people within the Orzhov as well. So that's a three-layered, I think it even says, it's like there are three levels of things that you can get into.
He's infiltrated the Simic. We don't know quite how or why, but he's infiltrated the Simic. And the Simic themselves are still kind of in turmoil between the Adaptionists and the Zagana half. I don't quite know. But Vannifar and Zagana are the two kind of heads that are still kind of fighting for control of the Simic. He partnered up with Tezzeret, and although they weren't able to blackmail Raoul Zarek, they are able to blackmail Vraska, because Vraska and Raoul were sent off to try and hunt down the remaining Bolas agents. But it was Lazav that sent an agent to kill Dovin Barn. So Lazav's responsible for killing Dovin Barn. He's responsible for Vraska not getting her kill as well, and now they're sort of trapped in this little blackmail thing. If he's partnered up with Tezzeret, that means he's got influence off plane now as well. Like, you're right. The Dimir during the time of Dissension were big players, and then they went into the shadows during Return to Ravnica, and now they're kind of re-emerging again. We also, in the build-up to War of the Spark, we saw in the Nicky Drayden stories and the individual kind of like slice of life stories, which kind of followed a member of each guild as they go through their day-to-day. The whole mise-en-scène of those stories, the whole look of the Ravnica sets leading up to War of the Spark, because War of the Spark technically wasn't a Ravnica set, even though, debatable. It was all very film noir. It was all very secret agent, like kind of hidden in the shadows, backroom deals, kind of things going on under the surface leading up to Bolas kind of arriving. And that is right in Dimir's wheelhouse. So I just think with all this culmination, this kind of flip round of power balance, and even the guilds that are still in power now having internal turmoil as opposed to just oppressing the other 9 guilds, I think, what my prediction is, my big prediction, is that the next set that we go back to Ravnica is going to be one of 2 things. It's going to be some dystopian nightmare where Niv Mizzet has turned Ravnica into like new Niv Mizzet, city.
Yeah.
And the Bolas statue's gone, and now it's just a big fucking Niv Mizzet statue. That's one possibility. The other possibility, I think, is very much the other way, and it's going to feel very Kaladesh. And I think it's going to be the Gruul clans and the Selesnya and the Golgari and all these underground clans have retaken massive portions of the city, and now we're seeing the kind of establishment being challenged by the more renegade guilds. That's what I think, and it's gonna be summer, so they're still gonna keep the seasons. I think it's gonna be summer, or spring. Spring would be a good one as opposed to autumn and winter. And it's gonna be Ravnica is gonna be much more feral. The Rakdos are gonna be having like festivals out in the streets as opposed to in like things. Oh, that's another thing. Sorry, I know I've gone on for about 5 minutes straight now.
I like this. I'm smiling. This is good. I like
it. The Rakdos, having been the entertainers and curried favour with the people of Ravnica, because even though they are seen as being dangerous and wild and kind of taboo, they still throw the best parties. They have the best clubs.
Everyone has their fetish. Come on.
Exactly. But explicitly, Rakdos was always seen, because he's a big fucking demon, as being a bit of a shit. Who was the one who flew up to Bolas with Gideon riding on his back to try and save the day? It was fucking Rakdos.
He claims at the end of it in their burn and blood party that it was his victory.
Yeah. So I think the people of Ravnica are going to remember that, and all the authoritarianism and all the kind of, no, let's push down the artists, let's push down like the hippies of the Selesnya, let's push down the kind of rebels of the Gruul. I think people are going to go, well, no, fuck that. You guys ruined it. Azorius, you had us all under a bloody lockdown. Like, Orzhov, your ghost gods are gone now, and now it's some bloody spotty teenager with a law book slung over his shoulder. No, fuck these guys. Isn't he like, he's sleeping with the leader of the Izzet. This is all a conflict of interest.
Yeah, that's one thing that was interesting. Like, as soon as we went back to the guilds, the dust hasn't even settled. That people aren't even able to have their victory dances yet, and they're already having a meeting and they're already bickering. It was one of the things that was quite nice to see is because when I was going to, I was thinking, oh man, like everything must be completely like, it's all going to be in disarray. And then the more I looked at it, the more I realized everything, there is still a structure in place. It's this, the thing about Ravnica I love is it's always this, everything seems like everything's got its plan. And then you realize, oh, actually, no, everything's in complete disarray. But it's always because underneath it, there's always someone who actually does have a plan. And that's what I love about Ravnica is every single time it is this. It's just this every single time. And we end. And the only thing disappointed me, I think, in the end was that I really wanted Tezzeret's arc to be non-related to Ravnica. I felt like we could have just let Ravnica just sit. And as you say, I would love to come back to see something massively different. As we saw with War of the Spark, we don't have to weight everything into the guilds of what we can see the plane like, which is why it probably didn't feel like a Ravnica set. But as you say, if we come back and is this massively dystopian or it's completely gone feral, I think it needs more time. And the problem with leaving it with, oh, Lazav and Tezzeret have their plans, is I reckon those plans are going to come to fruition sooner rather than later. I don't know. We'll have to see. The only thing I like is that Lazav does seem to be the wait and see kind of guy. And I'm not. I'd love to see how. I'd love to see. Yeah, give it a bit more breathing time. Give it a bit more time to kind of sit and fester. And let's see. I'd like to come back having there been a significant amount of time and things have changed. It's not just, oh, let's go and check in from where we left off last time. Because I feel like that's kind of the thing that disappointed me with all these story arcs, is they kind of cut off all the ones that allowed us to go somewhere else and look at something else for a little bit.
That's very true. I think we said on a previous podcast that at least I said it because I think I was trying to be super controversial and contrarian, that I didn't want to go back to Ravnica for a long time, and
Mm.
that still holds true. I wouldn't mind dipping in every once in a while, but that would require them to have story articles on the main website,
Mm.
which they're not doing.
Mm.
But whatever. That's a rant for a different time.
Well, yeah, but it's one of those things that gave this set such depth is the fact that you do have your D&D Guildmasters book. You did have these individual slice of life stories. You did have the Gathering Storm. You did have War of the Spark. You did have the Forsaken. You had all of this material that gave
the
you
Django Wexler stories.
Yeah, exactly. You have everything that kind of gave it. It's such a huge, diverse range of stuff to get your teeth into. And I do like they did this. As I say, I feel like this was the last hurrah for Rev for a while. I wouldn't be disappointed if we avoid it for a couple of years. Because then, as you say, it gives these story arcs time to breathe, so we can come back to something that might feel less like a traditional Ravnica, and something a little bit more different. Saying that, one of the things that was really interesting was out of all the 10 different guilds, 9 of them got new mechanics going into this.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them felt appropriate. All of them feel like the only one I don't really like is addendum, because it's just a bit like we had to give something to the Azorius. But even then, like even the way that they were able to get every single, it did feel like they tuned all of the guilds and they know what they want them to look like. So again, it'll be a matter of, do we come back to something that's very, very similar and they do the tried and tested thing for a 4th time, because it will be the 4th time we see it, or do we do something a little bit off the walls? And maybe do something that's completely different and bring it back again to some aspect of normality.
I mean, what could they do? So the only other plane really that's had as many trips back, I suppose, is Dominaria. Because I know Zendikar is obviously the one they go back to a lot as well. But Zendikar, by its very nature, is very tumultuous and changes a lot every time we see it. So Dominaria also had a similar thing. But the advantage they have with Dominaria is that because it's meant to be a planet that's 3 times the size of Earth, they can focus a whole set on just one continent if they really wanted to. And it's very different. Whereas Ravnica, they've kept every single set to the 10th fucking district or Tin Street. Do you know what I mean? Like, they seem to have this hub of activity, which I think is nice because it kind of plays fan service to people who go, oh yeah, that's the same area that they were in last time. But they can really, like, we haven't really been to the Rubber Belt for any significant amount of time, where all the Gruul clans are. We haven't really spent much time in the Undercity. Like, we did for a couple of individual stories, and the documentation of the power struggles between the Golgari is there. Like, it is a big thing for them. But very much like how when we went back to Theros and we were like, well, why did the Return to Theros set do so much time above in the overworld, where their underworld was the thing that we thought we were going to explore? They could do a similar thing with Ravnica. Like, I know Ravnica is meant to be like a plane-wide city, but is there space for them to do something where they maybe, like, they discover a sea, or they have, like, a new area that they don't really know about, or, like, an over-city arises? Maybe they'll do, like, a class divide instead of a clan divide, or a guild divide. Like, where can Ravnica go that it hasn't pigeonholed itself by being so successful into what it's already done?
Yeah, it does almost feel a little bit like Breath of the Wild, where as much as it is a hugely expansive game, there is still a limit to how far you can go. And there is still like a border to your map, and you still go, but there's still more world over there. And it kind of feel like Ravnica does the same thing, because we're going to offer you this massive diversity of a citywide plane, but you still only feel like you see maybe 100 square miles of it. Which is really weird. It's a really weird disconnect. So I guess how do you make something feel so wide and expansive, but also something you can typically recognize? And that's always going to be a big problem with Ravnica. I think it's one of the few sets that really has, one of the few planes that has this problem of where we have something that we're so attached to, and it has such a rigidity to its structure. Like, even like someone like Dominaria, we can bounce around from different continent to continent, and it doesn't matter which part of Dominaria it is. Whereas Ravnica, it always feels like everything kind of has to be implicit of itself. And this is why I say, like, if we give it some time, because it is that question of where can it go. And this is also, weird enough, one of the first times we've had multiple planeswalkers at the heads of guilds. Like, Ral Zarek can't just bounce off world and do what he wants. I know Ral was one of the few that didn't want to. And to be fair, both Ral and Vraska, as much as we've seen them do other things, they do like where they live. They do love Ravnica, and they want to fight for their guilds. That does create an issue of, well, the last time we had a planeswalker who was in charge of anything, our guild pact was off-world for several months at a time with amnesia. So I guess there is a degree of maybe there'll be inter-struggles, but the inter-struggles as well, I mean, they seem far too nuanced to base an entire set around. You can't do a politics set, really, can you? It doesn't work so well.
No, especially if, you have to really
New
hammer
mechanic,
home which
object.
is the good one, which is the bad one.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's another thought for you then, in terms of Ravnica, just as the plane as it exists now compared to every other plane of the multiverse. Ravnica is one of the only planes that we know of that explicitly knows about planeswalkers and the existence of the multiverse, because everyone on Ravnica has now physically fucking seen
right? There's no denying it
planeswalkers
anymore.
and has seen the portal with all of the Amonkhet zombies rushing through. Like, there's no hiding that
God, there's
scenario.
so much PTSD on Ravnica right now, honestly.
Like it's a plane that understands now its position. Pardon me, its position in the world.
Yeah.
Like we see in every story, because otherwise it just gets boring. Like, to have planeswalkers keep explaining what a planeswalker is to every new person that meets them. Like, every plane has a few people that understand about the multiverse. I mean, on Theros, one of the gods fucking knows about it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But yeah, Ravnica is now, like, everyone on Ravnica knows, and so that's got to change things slightly. Could we see in a future Ravnica set, the Is It League working on interplanar technology? Could we see the Dimir, now that we have an influencer in Tezzeret for Lazav off-world? Could we see them now collating information on planner people of interests as opposed to just Ravnican people of interests? Like Lazav had on his card, Lazav the Multifarious. This is something that I think they buried the lead on it so much.
I know what you're going to. I think I know what you're going to say.
Well, he has all those heads.
Yeah.
He has all those busts of people of influence. So he had, one of the big ones that we saw is that he had a big bust of Niv Mizzet. You see a bunch of other people in the background. And there's this idea that it's very much like the Game of Thrones idea, where if you have someone...
Did you see a helmet of Venser? Was there Garrick's helmet in there somewhere?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
kind of things, yeah.
Yeah, and all he needs is like a bust to kind of like re-key himself into becoming that person or that thing. What if Tezzeret brings him back a bust of someone? What if he brings back a bust of a planeswalker or a head of state or something like that? They've broken the seal on Kaya fucking taking non-planeswalker people from plane to plane.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that. That's not that's one of the things we're talking.
Tezzeret has a planar bridge technology still kind of part of him, although he, it's part of his body, isn't it? It's not part of his
defunct
arm.
as well. I think the whole point was that he had to break it, and that's what allowed him then to off-fuck when Dak Khan and Samut went to go.
Okay, yep. Good point. Well made.
Pretty sure he doesn't have that crazy. He doesn't have the same ability, but he has the ability, I've reckoned, to replicate it and everything within him as well. Yeah.
Okay, but he is still someone that's affiliated with, bouncing around different planes. Obviously, he's a planeswalker, but
he's also now directly affiliated with Lazav.
So I think if this is a really slow burn, I was talking to someone on Discord, actually. I was on the Rules Committee Discord, because they have a Discord that's free to join. And I was talking to someone on there in their Vorthos and Flavor section. I was talking to them about our kind of theory that there are maybe multiple Narsets running around the Multiverse. There are some good points against it, but I was still holding my own to say that they might be true. And I was talking to them about what's his kind of thing about drip dropping the stories. They're not doing big arcs now. What they're doing is they're doing maybe a year and a half if they're smart, which... of doing these little trippy drop stories of kind of going, okay, well, here's a little thing, there's a little signifier, there's a card with the Wanderer on it, maybe what's she doing? And I think, oh god, could you just imagine if Lazav got the ability to travel to different planes? We'd be fucked because he wouldn't
what
be.
Is his intention? We still have no idea about his intentions or
but
anything.
The Dimir aren't evil. Like, yeah, they're assassins, right? Yeah, fine, they're fucking assassins. Every fucking guild has assassins. Like, they're all killing each other. Let's not get on moral high ground about that. But they have often used their information gathering technology and their sort of finger on the pulse attitude to benefit the people of Ravnica. If you can, pay for their services, or if they kind of give information to the right people at the right time. At no point has Lazav, Zadek, who was the old Dimir Guildmaster, yes, fine, he was a complete twat. But Lazav, although, yes, he's a killer, yes, he's a spy, yes, he'll take children from their parents if he wants the child, but has he made a power play to completely dominate Ravnica? No.
Well, this is where the muddying of the Tezzeret thing annoyed me, because it was taking someone who we implicitly know to be an evil man or something that Magic presents. This is one thing that I like about Magic as an IP is it does very well at making you know who the bad guy is, and it doesn't do it in like any. Sometimes it can fall a bit flat, but it does tend to at least give you a bit of nuance to your characters and give you a reason and an understanding. But Tezzeret is one of these people you're supposed to think is a vile bastard, and then you take someone like Lazav who might have nuanced intentions. You don't want to put him on either side, and if you put those two together, as much as it does make me question, well, maybe it's not quite so bad whatever Tezzeret's doing, it does make me then go, oh, you're just working with Tezzeret, well, that's just another big bad evil twirly mustache guy. Like, come on, you're supposed to be better than this. And what I also liked is that at the beginning of their meeting, he pretends to be the Wanderer. And then, like, as you're reading, you're like, wait, but I don't. Oh, and then it's Lazar, and you're like, don't stop. I love how he just does at the beginning of any scene, any meeting. He just goes, right, who's the person that would make this person take a step back the most? You know, before going, no, it's just me again. Got ya. That's 15 times I got you now. I reckon.
Well, yeah, because he impersonated Chandra when confronting Dovin Barn on top of the Azorius building, which had the triangle. What do we call it?
Mortal Sun.
The Immortal Sun. Yeah, I'm the worst Morthos ever. I quit. I'm so sorry.
It's fine.
I'm so sorry, Richard Garfield. He impersonated Chandra.
Yeah, before he went, shook into your eyes. You know, he's such a cool person. Such a cool
man.
Guy. With a flamethrower.
I really like
How do you pretend to be Chandra? With real fire. Oh, that's great. Anyways, before we gush over him. But I mean, don't worry, it's interesting because it does, as you say, take these diametric. I don't think they're opposed in any way, shape, or form. It felt weird to then go, because I thought Tezzeret might have some other big far-flung plans, and it turns out, oh no, it's back implicitly tied again. Now, question, because Tezzeret had been working recently with the Phyrexians, and we're probably going to go back to Phyrexia, and that's the only way I can really think of, like, and now Lazav's looking at maybe doing extra planar. This is what you said about what happens if Ravnica starts looking elsewhere in the multiverse. Who do we have at the head of a guild pack, apart from a really, really, really smart, ambitious dragon, who was already looking into things like Project Lightning Bug and stuff like that was already working on how to do basically a planar map of knowing where people are in the multiverse. I reckon this is probably I think you're exactly on the right track. I reckon that Lazav and Tezzeret, I'm calling this big brain thinking now, tin hat, I'm calling that Tezzeret and Lazav are going to manipulate Niv Mizzet to try and make Ravnica be able, not as an entire plane, that would be mad, but to at least be able to, have interplanar travel.
Well, do you know what? If we're comparing War of the Spark to being the end game of the Magic world, what was another big push for Marvel to have? So we had Nick Fury creating the Avengers because he suddenly realized that they were a planet in a big universe full of scary things. Could Niv Mizzet be Nick Frost? Nick Frost? Nick Fury. Could Niv Mizzet be Nick Frost?
That'd be even better. Can I get you anything, sir? Cornetto.
Yeah, Cornetto. Oh, fuck.
Oh, we've done it.
I was building to a big point and then I was shafting myself. Sure.
But exactly, you know what I mean?
I mean, obviously, it's, earlier on when we were talking, everything was kind of based off the fact that we had direct things from the stories. We are getting into tin hat,
of course.
tinfoil hat territory. Exactly. But something, I just think is interesting. Like, if they don't do anything with it, fine, because it kind of then keeps the status quo to be able to do like a really hardcore Ravnica set in the future, as opposed to now just always referencing the fact that yes, they know that planeswalkers exist, and I wouldn't blame them for doing that, and that's fine because I wouldn't be upset with like a proper true blue Ravnica set. Exactly. But it's just how can you have it go back to being the way that it was after such a big story arc finisher, like Vitu-Ghazi and Trostani. Vitu-Ghazi's dead, but Trostani is now like harmonious again. Like, does that change the Selesnia's thing? Because the reason that the Selesnya were being all fucking shifty in the latest sets is because Trostani was discordant and Vitu-Ghazi was dying, but then he got reawoken, and then Kaiju smashed out of existence, but like now he was.
No. Kaiju smashed out of existence is a great way to explain it.
That's the name of my new prog rock album. But now Trostani's cordant again as opposed to discordant. Like, what does that mean for everyone? I think the wilds might take over. I think it'd be a nice idea to have Ravnica now being like an extra planar force in the multiverse. But I think what's more likely, if more boring, is that they'll just have the lesser clans, the lesser guilds flip the power structure.
Yeah, look within rather than without. I mean, I do understand. Obviously, the way their story structures work now, it makes much more sense to keep all of the stories looking within the planes rather than without the planes. It's just the Tezzeret thing is the thing that they Kimiko. At least keep your finger on the pulse just to see maybe what happens with that. The only other two big things that obviously came out in terms of story arcs out of the back of this is that we had a mention of Khan, Teferi, and I forgot the third one. Who was the third one who was going off to help them? Who's going to save? Who's going to go and kill the Phyrexians? Teferi, Khan, and I can't remember who the third one was. There were three of them. The third one doesn't matter if you're not Teferi or Khan.
Not Jaya. Jaya's gone now, isn't she?
Yeah, I think but she was still with the funeral pyre at the end for Liliana. I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, we've still got the Phyrexian open thread, which is obviously a big baddie, and I reckon that's probably going to be one of the main ones that we go to. I reckon it'll be at the end of like a cycle of a few like little planes that we bounce to, because that's got to be a big culmination.
That'll have a build up to it. That won't just happen.
The fact we've just seen a Darksteel Colossus makes me feel like okay, and the fact he's holding a dude means that the war's still going on. There's still stuff. There's still
Vorthos Mike, when he pointed that out to us, he said that they were humans. I think he just meant there were people because they actually look more like the race of people that Koth belongs to.
The
Moriox?
No, Volshox. There we go.
Volshox.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, there aren't any atypical humans as they were. Like they've all got metalness to them. There is still a conflict going on there. The other one, and this is the really interesting one that I like a lot, is the I'm backing onto a buddy cop thing. We've got Kaya, Teo, Ratand, and Anna Eora. We're now calling her, bouncing around the plane together as this makeshift family, which I think is really
For
cute.
those who don't know, Anna Eora is Liliana.
Right? She did the Harry Potter thing of where they take on the name of the other person. It's so camp.
I
know.
The treatment of Liliana after War of the Spark makes me puke every evening. It's just I don't
know. I like the fact that we get to see one of the things he said about when we're doing the Transform episode. It was nice to see Liliana before she went all necromantic nonsense. So I like to see something a bit more grounded with her. It did feel a bit too like you are the most powerful thing in the world. You've got this crazy. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm annoyed that we've left the veil. But the fact that it's not destroyed, the fact it could still kind of come back in some fashion would be great.
Well, the veil's now on Ravnica.
Yeah, exactly. So what can that... Yeah, this is the thing. Like they've done enough to keep threads potentially open whilst also settling things down in case we don't need to. But the big thing, Andy, man, is the last thing that Kaya says is that they're going back to her home plane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know Kaya's surname, even though it's insinuated it's for a reason she doesn't use it, which means it's being masked for some reason. I mean, she knows she's of nobility. In the same kind of... It almost feels like she's kind of on a similar vein to like the Kenriths, of where they're off-world from being nobles from another plane. But the fact that we don't know anything about it, apart from there's a goddess, and it's kind of hinted at when Rat and Kaya merged that there's some relevance and specificity to this goddess about her being an important thing or deity, and also the northern light effect that she says happens across the sky that's deepening everyone's going mad. Basically, the weather's turning everyone crazy. That to me, that's quite cool. I like the fact that we're going to be, and the fact that it hints at the end of the book and leaves it as such a bookend to the chapter and everything makes me feel that's probably going to be one of the ones we see next year. I think it was around September time that we learned that we were going to be going back to Zendikar, that we had a Courier, and that we had the core set, Teferi core set coming out. So give it a few months, we might have next year's prospected sets out. And I'd be surprised if Tolvada isn't in there.
Sure. I mean, Kaya was a character that they were building up specifically for War of the Spark to kill the Obzedat. They wanted this character that could kind of kill ghosts, to the point so much where they knew they were going to be having these storylines around the time Conspiracy 2 came out, and they retroactively put Kaya in that set. So they had this Planeswalker slot open, and they went, well, we have this Planeswalker that we know needs to be important for war. Let's put them in this set as well and have them kind of be introduced here so we can kind of call back on them in a more natural way. So yeah, I'd be very surprised if Kaya's not one of the new pantheon of like focused Planeswalkers. So like next year, I think it's going to be, Vivian's kind of having her day in the sun now, but I think that'll carry through. So, you'll have Kaya, you'll have Vivian, Luca might be a new big bad, Tezzeret will be like the new sort of Bolas figure in the background, kind of pulling strings, and then Lazav and Niv Mizzet ride on Interplanet motorbike, fucking shooting lightning at everyone, killing them.
And having taken over Phyrexia, Khan having failed or whatever. Like, there is actually still a lot, like for as much as they have, like, there is still a lot left, still up in the air. There are still a few threads that we can mess around with. And the only thing is also it kind of dissipated the Gatewatch a little bit. There isn't this united front. Everyone's kind of doing their own. Ajani, it's Ajani that's with Khan and Teferi. Good God, there we go, we got there.
Yeah.
Whoo, buddy. If I'm also now wrong, that makes me look like even more of an idiot. But I'm pretty sure it's Ajani.
Well, all right. Let me ask you. Let me ask you then.
Yeah.
So they did the thing where what's his chops? Sideburns dies. What's his face? Gideon.
Oh, Gids. Beef slab. Yeah, absolutely.
That one. Whatever. You'll be fucking missed.
That's so mean.
I couldn't give a shit about Gideon. I know that's really bad.
I read the book this morning. I can't believe it's so soon.
Rest in peace, bloody Kinder Egg, whatever your name is. And he's dead. Chandra's in a spiral. Nissa, they've fucked up, so they won't be coming back to her very often.
We could have come back to her and Zendika, I reckon. We'll see her and Zendika.
Okay, yeah, good point. Yeah. Jace is off brooding about Vraska because the writers messed that bloody relationship up.
Do I choose my head or my cock? Which one do I go for?
Yeah. Right. And all these characters now either very broken, dead, or reformed, right? So I think their storylines are maybe petered out a little bit. So we have these new characters, but why then did they choose? Because they know about these storylines years in advance. Why did they choose to have Teferi, Ajani, and Kaya all take the oath? Khan didn't. He explicitly didn't take the oath of the Gatewatch, but the other three did. And if all these are going to be major players in new storylines, my point is that Kaya took her oath during the events of War of the Spark, at the time when they knew the Gatewatch, or at least seemingly to us, the Gatewatch was going to be disbanded.
Do you know why? In Ajani's words, there's always going to be a next time. That's why. What I like is they've got the concentrated squash. They got that cordial, that really, really strong Ribena. They put it in a glass. That's the Gatewatch, and then they added some water to it to dilute it, so it didn't taste so horrible when you drink it. They've diluted it. The Gatewatch is now wider. It's not just this collection of we are the Avengers. Let's go and solve our sequel trilogy. It's not like that anymore. Now it's just that War of the Spark, if it did nothing else, it kind of tied all these different players, at least to acknowledge each other all in a kind of similar. They've got individual plights and they've got their own problems, but when they need to, they can come together. And it was just a confirmation for people like Kaya, people like Teferi that go, look, I've seen enough things and enough tragedies to know what I can do to help. So if you call on me, I will be there.
Do you know what? That's a nice sentiment. And as much as the meme is that the Justice League is not a very good look for Magic, I actually didn't mind it in terms of what it was trying to do for the storyline at the time.
I like superheroes.
I just kind of thought...
I couldn't help but like it. It was horrible.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, and that's fair. People like what they like. And it's a bit mean when Magic memes kind of overtake people's genuine reaction to stuff. But I wasn't upset at the idea that maybe once Bolas had been fucked off, the Justice League would be fucked off too.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, like if you grow up on Power Rangers, you just like it when you have 5 different characters and they've all got a different color and they all have their own. You just can't help it. Your brain goes, Voltron, yay! You can't help it. It just happens, and they knew what they were doing. The thing is, again, like geek culture, like our culture and our community, we are already kind of tuned into those kind of signifiers, and we've already subverted, undermined, and found actual genuine reasons to like things like anime and stuff like that. We already know the IPs that you're playing towards, so we needed a bit more nuance, and Justice League kind of didn't have enough of that. That was the problem, and I think they went to great strides to make sure that they kind of undid that a little bit, and made sure it wasn't quite such a hammer over the head. So yeah, I do think that we've still got enough stuff and enough things to go on. And the fact, like, having read off the back of that, it does give me confidence to see that we are still going to have, it's not all just going to be new stories. I love Decoria, and it's nothing better than having a story that you can kind of get your teeth into, and then you see a character like, say, Narset or Vivian that bounces, and you go, oh, I know them, they're from that other thing, from that, yeah, okay, cool. It doesn't all have to be driven, as you say, like, as we've seen, like, as these giant 10-year arcs, because it does maybe give too much weight to the individual. Every single word has to matter at that point, whereas you might have some more freedom to have these individual stories. But even there, we try to pick it apart. There's actually so much still going on, Vorthosian-wise, that they're going to have to do at least some justice to. Or they ignore it all and we get angry for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my things. I was talking to people on that Rules Committee Discord about the Narset theory, about how we have an old Narset and a young Narset in the same set in Ikoria. And then someone just went, yeah, but they de-aged Arlen Cord by about 30 years in War of the Spark. And I went, oh, dinger, you're right, like they did. So yeah, they're not always truly consistent. And a lot of the signifiers we might be picking up on, maybe just someone going, oh shit, yeah, I didn't mean to make her that old. Or like, oh no, we didn't mean to give that artist that note. Oh, sorry. So yeah, I know that's
And then
maybe
on the flip side,
undercut.
as you say, the Narset thing compared to the Arlen thing, like Narset was very specific aging to give a signifier, as we've learned.
Well, that was my counterpoint.
And that's
yes.
the thing, like there are those 2 points of do you give enough that people are going to pay attention to and then they're going to overreact to, or do you give the signifiers and then maybe potentially they're lost and then you're like, but I did try. It's striking that middle ground. I mean, again, as long as you keep trying, same thing as you say with the alternate artwork, as long as you keep trying bits and pieces, I'm not going to be too annoyed. It's when you give up on things entirely and just go, well, we're not going to even approach this from another angle. I don't know how many more angles they can have for like story delivery. As you say, like the shameful thing about this like big 10-year arc is it did kind of fall on a slightly flat and sour note. I think that's just because a lot of people had not riding on it, but a lot of people had a lot of investment in a lot of these characters. And yeah,
it was very exciting. I remember
exactly.
when War of the Spark was coming out, and it was the same weekend. The pre-release weekend was the same weekend as Magic Fest London last year, and it was exciting. It was a big culmination. There was lots going on. There was going to be a fucking book. There's going to be all these different things, and Wizards appropriately built it up because why the heck wouldn't you? And they built it all up. They built it up, and the set was split opinion, but I think most people agreed that it was an interesting enough set to play, and they pulled off the 30-odd Planeswalkers, and then the storyline just crashed and fucking burned. And yeah, you're right. They just missed so sorely with things that were really important. They hit things which I think couldn't give a shit about, like some of the characterizations. Having Niv Mizzet become the new Guild Pact, sweet, brilliant, chef's kiss. But then for so many of the other really important stuff, they burnt it all down.
Well, the most important and interesting character was someone who was new, who was
oh Christ,
who wasn't even a planeswalker, and by the end kind of broke every rule in Magic. Yeah. So I know what you mean. It does. As I say, the only thing I do think they did is I think they did the denizens of Ravnica enough justice. I think they did that well enough. Obviously, they didn't necessarily handle all of our characters we've seen across multiple different planes, multiple different handlings of their story, kind of thing. Like I think it was always going to be a hard thing to balance. But I think the nicest thing about Ravnica is it gave us a crap load of stuff to talk about. And I say I do think down to its roots. I mean, it's still Ravnica based at the end of the day. The reason I built this up was because it was going into it. We didn't know if this was going to be the last time we ever see it. If it was ever going to be Ravnica again, we thought it could have Zendikar, it could have been completely, utterly destroyed. It's nice to know at the end of it that Ravnica is still there. And we'll have something nice to come back to.
Yeah, and I hope we do. I just hope it's not too soon, and I hope they do something different. As I will just say to people listening, like everything we've said is conjecture. It's conjecture based off of educated guesses and through lines that we've seen because we're invested in it. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably invested in it too, and you can put the pieces together, and then you can agree or disagree in your own educated guess. But they really haven't given any indication as to where the storyline is going to go in any hard way, shape, or form. I just think, they've dangled so much bait that if they don't come back to pick up at least a couple of these things, especially the juicier ones like the Lazav story,
they've missed on some big fish.
They've missed out. So we will see. I think we'll wrap up there. This has been a bit of a shorter one because I think we just wanted to give a bit of a nice little retrospective.
Well, as I say, we never got to really talk about it when it was in its prime. There was so much to talk about as it was coming out that it's a shame that we, everything in hindsight. But it was nice to at least give it a little look as it leaves us.
Absolutely. This is the point of the podcast, guys, where usually we tell people out there to be safe and to look after each other. We're not going to go too heavily into it because honestly, there are better people out there that will be saying things in a better way that we can. But we did put up a post on Twitter regarding the protests that are currently going on in the US, against sort of race suppression and police brutality, and they are starting to pick up in everywhere else in the world as well, and now having their own protests. We are having them in London. This is just to say, guys, if you are listening, please be safe out there if you can. We know that you can't, honestly, like these kinds of protests, the guarantee of safety is zero, but if you can be at all safe, please do. Stand up for your rights, and we support you, and Black Lives Matter. And that's really all there is to it. Nathan, do you have anything further to say?
No, that was succinct. That was exactly nice.
Cool. Well, other than that, guys, the only thing that is left to say is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.